Hey guys, it's Trail. We're back for the last and final installment of the Trail Needs an Elk Tag series. So this is number 3. This is going to be the final one. The previous 2, I talked a little bit about the opportunities that are available to you, how to use the insider research platform to find opportunities to pick up an over-the-counter or draw an elk tag. I've also, in the second part of this, kind of talked about using goHUNT maps and the features and the different layers and the tools that are involved in goHUNT maps to help you find an area and kind of narrow it down into a specific unit to hunt. And at this point, I'm kind of in the final stages to actually go in and actually purchase an elk tag. So with that in mind, I'm going to purchase a couple of elk tags. So I'm going to purchase one in my home state of Utah. So I live in Utah, therefore it's pretty easy for me to buy a general season archery elk tag. So the opportunities in Utah, I can buy an archery over-the-counter general season elk permit. And that's going to allow me to hunt either the any bull units or the spike units. So the spike units are, you can find those on the Insider platform, but those are also the units that are managed for limited entry elk. You just can't harvest a branch antler bull. You can go out and harvest a spike or a cow. Or I could hunt the any bull units, which are managed for opportunity type of hunts. Many of those any bull units don't have large populations of elk, or they potentially have some issues with access or private lands. There are some decent options, maybe there in the northeast corner of the state. The Uintas is a good unit. It's got a lot of public land and actually has quite a few elk. But for me, living in southern Utah, my best option is probably the spike units. I have a general season deer tag on one of those units, so I'm going to go in and buy a Utah general season archery elk tag, and I'm going to be able to hunt either archery, deer, or elk on that unit. Cool thing about that is it's a spike unit. I can actually harvest either a cow or a spike. The other really good thing I like about that Utah general season tag is that it opens up on August 19th this year. So I can go in and I can hunt that in early August, and I can still get out and hunt the second state, which I'm also going to buy an over-the-counter permit for, which is Colorado. So Colorado still has, at this point, over-the-counter archery elk options. They also have second and third rifle season over-the-counter options to hunt. There's still a good number of units, and every unit in the state of Colorado that you can buy an over-the-counter license and hunt has enough elk that you can definitely find success. So I'm going to go in and buy one of those Colorado permits. Those go on sale August 1st. You can actually buy those up and even into your hunt. You can buy those online. You can buy them at a sporting goods store there in Colorado when I get there for my hunt. So those are going to be my 2 options. So I've made it through the point where, Trail needs an elk tag. I'm going to have 2 elk tags probably by the first part of next week. And like I said, I'll probably just buy both of those online. The tags in Utah are unlimited for archery. The tags in Colorado for archery elk, second and third rifle season, those are also unlimited. So I have no issues whatsoever in getting my permits. Cost in Colorado, you have to buy the hunting license. It's going to be $92. You probably, myself included, I already bought that license in order to apply in their state draw. The elk tag cost for a non-resident is going to be $759.24. So I'm going to be into that, over $800. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast and where we're at in the West right now for an elk tag as an out-of-stater. You're going to be right around that $1,000 mark, unfortunately. In Utah, it's a little bit more economical for me, being that I'm a resident. I've only got to pay the $56 permit fee as a resident. If you are a non-resident, it's not too bad. It's $613. And like I said, you have the option to hunt the spike units or the any bull units. I actually think that's probably one of the most underutilized over-the-counter elk opportunities in the West. I think it's a really good chance to get out, see some amazing country, hunt elk, and some of the absolute best trophy units in the state. But like I said, you can only typically harvest a spike in those. So I got my elk tags. Next step for me is really to dive back in and start making my hunt plans. I've narrowed down the unit, like I said, in Utah. It's a unit that I've hunted a bunch. So for that one, I have a whole lot less work to do than I do in Colorado. Kind of my first steps after I've picked my unit in Colorado using the filters and the different tools that I showed you within my Insider research platform is to find a unit. So I've got a unit picked in Colorado I think is conducive to the style of hunting I like to do. That is based on the number of hunters surveyed. So the unit I picked has slightly less pressure than some of the other over-the-counter units. It also has some roadless and some remote wilderness type terrain. I like to backpack hunt. I like to get out away from people if I can. So the unit I've picked has more wilderness, more remote country. I don't mind working for an elk, and I actually think it provides me the opportunity to potentially maybe tag out on a more mature bull. So I've got my unit picked in Colorado. I'm not going to show the unit, obviously, because I don't need any more company than is probably already going to be there. Within that unit that I've picked in Colorado, my next step is really to start using the other tools, the things that I've learned about elk. And you can refer back to the other series that we've done about elk, just general elk hunting, getting to know how elk move, their behaviors, and their habitat needs. You can use that information to really hone in and start to pick apart areas. Once I've used that information, so I'm looking for things like bedding cover. I'm using the terrain analysis tool to evaluate slope. I'm looking for those maybe 5 to 15, 20 degree slope ranges. Elk tend to like those areas because they're great for bedding. I also want to use that layer in conjunction with the terrain analysis tool. So I want to look mostly at north, northwest, northeast facing slope, because I know elk during that early archery season in September, body heat retention is of vital importance, and they're going to need that bedding cover and that shade and that cooler temperature. So they like those north, northwest, northeast facing slopes. So I'm going to be looking at that. I'm going to be looking at things like water. So I'm going to really be honing in and looking at the aerial imagery and cruising across the landscape, looking for those little seeps and springs, those little benches that may have a wet meadow, a wallow, maybe a pond. Elk definitely need water, and like I said in the other video series, they like those standing water sources. They like wallows, especially as those bulls are starting to rut cows. They're going to come in and utilize those wallows to essentially turn themselves into a walking billboard. They're going to make themselves really smelly and advertise themselves as an available bachelor to those cow and calf herds. So I'm looking at those kinds of things. I'm looking at benches and saddles, and really I'm also looking for where the pressure points are. Where are the roads and trails and the trailheads? Because that's where people are going to congregate. This is where your historical imagery can come in really handy. I like to check the trailheads for all the areas that I'm considering. And I can look at the historical imagery, and I can usually find a map from September timeframe, and I can really see how many vehicles might be parked at that trailhead. I can also cruise the landscape, and I can look for things like camps, wall tents. Recently, just looking through, found a couple wall tents that were in an area that I was considering, so that kind of lets me know that there possibly is some pressure from other hunters that are camped in there, probably with horses and mules, and they've set up a wall tent. I'm also using historical imagery to look at the vegetation. So I'm looking at kind of that transition across the time frame. If I can find a map that's in that September, October time frame, I want to look at the landscape and look at those layers of vegetation. I'm really looking for those green layers of vegetation, those wet meadows, those areas that elk really like to feed. I'm also looking for things like edge habitat. Elk absolutely love edge habitat. They need that to feed, and they also have the bedding cover in close proximity to those feeding areas. So they really like those edge types of habitats. Other layers that I'll be considering as I'm looking for specific areas to hone in are things like fires. So fire layer is very important in my preseason elk scouting on my maps. I'm also looking at things like beetle kill. If you've got a beetle killed area that's maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, it's going to allow enough sunlight to really get down to the landscape. That vegetation on the floor of the forest is really going to pop. It's going to blow up, and a lot of times those elk actually don't even need to come out of those beetle killed areas because they've got enough feed in them. They also have water that's going to pop up in little pockets because you've got so much more available resources because all those trees have died off from beetle kill. So I'm also, like I said, I'm looking for beetle killed areas. Next step for me is to start dropping polygons on the areas that I'm most interested in. I don't worry too much about access of those areas right now. I'm really just trying to identify areas that I think are the most conducive to having elk in them, and also a reduced pressure from other hunters that are available and might want to get back into those areas. I also look at private public land layers. There's a lot of times that you might be able to find your way back around on the backside of some private land and kind of hunt the edges of that. There's a lot of times that private land will harbor elk. It'll allow some bulls to get some age class to them. And elk are a big animal. They move a lot. They're probably not going to retain or stay on that private land the entire time. So it can really help sometimes on hunting the borders of those private lands and get to know the movements of those elk if they're coming in and out of that area. So I'm definitely using private public layers as well. After I've identified areas and I've dropped polygons and I've dropped waypoints on all the wallows and water sources, the feeding areas, sometimes I will drop polygons on areas that I think are the most likely bedding areas. My next step is to pull up the roads and trails layers and start to evaluate how I'm going to access those areas that I want to hunt. I'm going to find glassing points as well, because if it's early season and the elk really aren't talking, I am going to put my glass to work and really cover the country and see what's out there on the landscape just by scanning, whether through it's a pair of binoculars or a spotting scope. And I'm going to start using my maps to find those glassing points as well. Next step, after I've got my whole hunt plan kind of put together as far as laid out on my map, is to actually put together a plan. And this has not been a strong suit of mine in the past. I typically have not prepared a hunt plan. I just kind of done my e-scouting. I've talked to people, biologists, game wardens, whoever it might be, and I have it kind of in my back of my mind, and I have it built into my maps, the areas I want to hunt. But I haven't been that great about actually writing down a hunt plan. And that's something that I think I'm going to try to change this year after talking with Mark Livesay over at Treeline Pursuits. He's got a full hunt plan lined out. He's got areas A, B, C, and D. He's got his days planned out. He has the mileage to the areas he wants to hunt. He has the areas lined out that he wants to camp. My personality, I probably won't go that deep, but I do think it is beneficial to have a hunt plan lined out, including my areas A, B, C, and D. I just think the ability to go down through your list of your hunt plan, if one area doesn't pan out, you have the ability to go to your next best area that you've identified on your maps and your preseason e-scouting. So that's going to be my next step. He has a template which I think is really cool. I think I'm going to utilize that and try to help myself lay out a good hunt plan prior to even getting out there on the ground. Next couple steps for me are preseason prep is, shooting my bow, shooting my weapon, being really familiar with my weapon. I absolutely want to make sure that my bow is 100% dialed. I want to make sure that it's tuned. I want to make sure that every arrow I plan on taking in the field has been shot with the broadhead at distance. I want to establish my effective shooting range. So I want to know, what's too far. I definitely think that's something to be aware of when you're shooting in the summer, is kind of evaluate and set parameters. This is my effective shooting range, and ethically I think you kind of owe it to yourself and to the animal to maintain those. So those are all things I'm going to be establishing the rest of the summer. I've got my bow to a place right now where I really like it, shooting really good. I'm shooting every single morning, even on travel days. If I come to Vegas, I'm shooting in the morning in my basement at 15 yards, probably at least 10 arrows. So I want to absolutely make sure that my weapon is dialed prior to the season. And then lastly, if I can get a weekend or two, I'm going to try to run out and get boots on the ground and just truth the areas that I've e-scouted. I want to look at the trailheads. I want to look at the roads. I want to see what the landscape looks like. For me, it seems like no matter how much time I put forth on e-scouting, I get out on the landscape, it always looks a little bit different than I think it does. I might think I'm way more capable when I'm just looking at a map than my actual abilities when I get out on the ground to navigate that country. It could be steeper. It could be, the access could be further than what it looked on the map. So I definitely want, if I can, to get out, get boots on the ground, look at the landscape, look at the roads, look at the trails, look at the trailheads, and then if I can get up to those glassing areas and put my binos to work, hopefully I can find some elk. And there's really nothing better, in my opinion, if you're going hunting, whether it's for elk or mule deer, than actually getting out in the summer months prior to your hunt and getting boots on the ground and just actually laying your eyes on the animal that you're intending to hunt. If you can do that, it just seems like the motivation, the anticipation, it all ramps up. It seems like everything comes together and you're just really feeling a whole lot better about your hunt. So those are kind of my last steps. Like I said, last video in this series, Trail Needs an Elk Tag. I'm ready to go. I'm going to pick up my permits the first part of this next week. I'm going to continue working on the rest of these steps so that when August 19th opens up for me in Utah, I'm going to be ready to hit the ground. And then into September, I've got my days carved out. I'm going to run up there probably about the 12th through the 24th of September. Like, it's going to give me what I think is the best part of the rut. I'm just going to really give it a full effort, and hopefully I tag out on a couple of bulls this year. So that's the last step. If you guys got questions about these or any of the other videos that we've done in this series or the other series where we've talked more in depth about actual habitat needs of elk or behavior of elk, drop them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer those questions. So good luck to all you guys that are out chasing elk this year. There's no reason to stay at home. So get a tag and go elk hunting.